Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Dr. Vyvyane Loh, and we are streaming live for a Q&A session. I'd like to welcome whoever is here. Thank you for joining us on a Friday afternoon. And maybe you could tell me who you are or where you're joining us from. A little bit about you. We don't need to know everything about you, but just would be nice to know where you're joining us from. I think you can put that in the comments. Oh, there we go. Oh, brown coat blue. Yay. It's good to see you. Hi. Wow, that's nice. I feel like I'm meeting an old friend. Thank you. Okay. And is there anyone else? I think there Carl who's helping me. You don't see him on screen, but he told me there were a few other people. So if you feel comfortable, then let me know where you're tuning in from. Otherwise, I am here to. Hello. Okay, there's someone else. A lot of people saying hello now. Thank you. I'm here to answer any questions you may have based on what you might have heard on the podcast. If I can clarify things for you, that'd be great. Or if you just have any other questions on health, put that in the comment area. Or you just want to say hi and tell us a little bit about, your own health journey. Oh, Cecile, hi. Driss, yes. Pay attention to the driving. Okay. Good to see everyone. All right. Any questions for me in particular? We did with the podcast, I started off a little bit with metabolism. I know I wanted to do that. It might have been, hi Maya. It might have been a little technical for some, but eventually I want to be talking about cancer metabolism. And so I just needed to set the foundation. Okay. So that's why I did that for the first one. Oh, brown coat blue. I'm not sure, Carl. Can other people see the comments? I don't know. But we're hearing that you're from Chicago and have done the no sugar, no grain, no vegetable oils and down 90 pounds. That's excellent. Wonderful. Okay, you should keep with it, I hope. I think a lot of people, they get so excited. Okay, so everyone can see. Oh, okay. Everybody gets so excited with, when they learn that there's so much they can do about their health, because that's something we don't teach our patients. And when you find out that there's a lot that you can do to impact your health in a positive way, it can give you a high. One thing that I've found with my patients, though, is that sometimes when they go back into the real world and they realize that the rest of the world maybe doesn't realize that, and they're chomping down on their whole grains and their Wheaties, and then it gets a little hard because then everyone thinks you're weird. But, stick with it because the proof is in your health, right? And let's see what other. Yeah, okay. So Cecile wants to know about where to start with exercise. That's a good one. I have a range of patients. I have people who are wheelchair bound, people who are immobilized, due to the health conditions and so forth. So it really depends on the individual patient. The main thing we start with, I tell people, is to try and incorporate as much movement into your practice as possible. And I will be doing not one episode, I will be doing a whole module on movement, because movement and cognition are intimately linked, right? And we're talking about, improving cognition and rewiring the brain, something we call neuroplasticity. Then we have to incorporate movement into our day. So I would just start with movement, and then start with, if you're wheelchair bound, or you're immobilized to a chair or a bed, then there are lots of passive sort of exercises that you can do. And I would, with my patients, start with isometrics. So where you can contract your muscles and you're not moving them. So that's the beauty of it, because you don't have to work with weights. You don't have to put yourself, possibly in danger if you have all kinds of weights around you. So just contracting the muscle and holding it for a count of 10 seconds, right? Then release, relax, and then you do that again a few times. So those isometric contractions are really good for building strength. And once someone has gained a lot of strength with isometrics, and you really can gain a lot of strength with isometrics, then I would build in things like eccentrics, where the actually lengthening phase of the exercise, I try to use that. It's usually the easier phase of the exercise. Let's say if you are doing a biceps curl, if you are putting the weight down, that's generally the easier phase. But if you slow that down, that can bring a lot of benefits for muscle hypertrophy, growth of muscle, right? So there are all these tricks. We've certainly used blood flow restriction training, where we restrict the not the arterial blood flow, but the venous blood return, and that causes huge metabolic stress on the muscle, and that can really also help with great muscle growth. We tried that. Driss knows what I'm talking about because Driss volunteered for that, and we did our little own N of 1 experiment, and we dexed him afterwards, and we really got spectacular results. So there are many tricks to exercise, and a lot of times people think that it's just going to be going to the gym and doing, pumping iron and so forth. But we use isometrics, we use eccentrics, very useful, especially in a population that may be elderly, that may have problems with mobility. And you can really gain a lot of strength and muscle growth that way. And then maybe even blood flow restriction, depending on the patient population. So let's see. Oh yeah, Cecile, you said that it's your first live. It's my first live too, and I was just like trying to figure this out, right? So I'm learning as we go as well. So that's a great question on exercise. If people want, I can do a whole episode on exercise. We're really kind of passionate about that. And I'm constantly experimenting. And now I'm doing, for myself, I'm working on end range strength. And so that's something that I think will help people with mobility, for example. Driss says lifespan versus health span. Yeah, because I get asked a lot about anti-aging and longevity, right? And we think of the number of years that we may be here. But I think what is more important is your health span, the number of years you are healthy and vibrant while you are here. And I think we all, my theory is we should all go with the kadunk theory, right? You do well, you do well, you do well, one day, kadunk, done. That's how I want to go. So the kadunk um, uh, way of exiting the world is how I would like to go. And I think a lot of people are probably with me on that one. So rather than focus on just the number of years, and it could be miserable years, right? If you are doing dialysis, if you have to deal with chemo, there's a lot of suffering. And adding years may not be, worthwhile depending on how a person views it, right? So making sure that we prioritize our health span so that for as long as we are here, that we are vibrant, we are healthy, we can do all the things we want to do. And then, there's always going to be chance you could always be hit by that, meteorite that drops on you. But yeah, at least you did your best, right? Okay. Oh, Cecile, you want us to do one on exercise? I'd be happy to. It's one of my favorite topics. So, yeah, yep. Mr. Blue, you think that that's the way to go too? Yeah, I agree. Okay, hi dear. What are some blood work to check for inflammation? Thank you for joining us. I'm glad to see you here. For inflammation, it's kind of tough. Usually, the general inflammatory markers would be something like the HSCRP, the C-reactive protein. Some people do a sedimentation rate. So you could look at those markers and look for inflammation. The problem with that is sometimes you may have tissue-specific inflammation, and you're not actually going to see it in the blood. So you remember when we do blood work, we are really only able to detect whatever's in the bloodstream, right? And yet we can have inflammation in a tissue system, in an organ, right? And the rest of the body may look okay. So it's not always 100%. And you can look at different markers. There are tons of markers, on inflammation, but how much value does each one give? It really depends on the clinical picture. So, without knowing the patient and the clinical picture, it's really hard to generalize what's going on, right, in terms of inflammation. And I think, and that's the other thing, I would love to do a whole session on inflammation if people are interested. It's actually one of my passions. I know there's so many things I love. I love exercise science, I love nutrition, but really deep at heart, I am an immunometabolism gal. So the immune system and metabolism and how those are linked, which is why I, want to do eventually an episode on cancer metabolism. It's way more um, complicated, I think, than sometimes it's made out to be, right? But I think that would be a real fun episode because we've learned so much in the last 10 years about cancer metabolism. So, with inflammation, I just want to say that at any point in time right now, you have inflammation going on in your body. You also have anti inflammatory processes going on in your body. So, both at the same time. And it's the net balance, not only in your whole body, but net balance in a tissue that's really going to be important. You do not only want inflammation, and that seems obvious. You do not only want anti-inflammatory processes going on in your body. That might not be as intuitive, right? So if you think of cancer at any point in time, most of us have cancer cells in our bodies, but we have an immune system that can check those cancers and get rid of those cells when they encounter them. But if those cells are immunosuppressed, if there's too much sort of an anti-inflammatory environment going on, then they're not aggressive enough towards the cancer. They're not aggressive enough towards killing the cancer, seeking them out, recognizing them, and killing them. So in that case, and in a lot of cancers, what the research is on now is to help your inflammatory cells be more aggressive, be more inflammatory towards the cancers so you can kill those cancerous cells, right? So it seems counterintuitive to not want only anti-inflammatory sort of processes going on in certain tissues, but it's really very important to have that balance. Um, episode on exercise and resistance training. Yeah, that would be my dream. That's something I love very much. And we focus here at Transform, which is where I practice. And, if you ask anybody who knows us, my patients even, we spend a lot of time on exercise and resistance training. We've done several sort of little programs and games, not games, but they're little contests to get our patients moving and doing resistance training. We called it the resistance, and we called it join the resistance, and it was quite successful. We got a lot of people moving there, right? And it's not so easy to build muscle as people think. It's easy to lose muscle as we age. So I think prioritizing that would be a great thing, and I definitely do an episode on that. And counter-regulatory hormones work, and what changes we can make to ensure our hormones stay as balanced as possible. That's a very good one. Um, I'm in the process of getting to an episode on insulin resistance. Now, I've always known when I started this podcast that I would do an episode on insulin. So yeah, I see that comment there, insulin and cholesterol. So those have been topics that have been at the top of my mind for years, actually. So definitely wanted to get to insulin resistance, but I am doing a slow ramp up. And the reason for that is that it really has gotten quite confused. Sometimes I hear what people are discussing and we're fuzzy around the concepts, right? And so we kind of extrapolate based on the fuzziness of the concepts. And to avoid that, I really wanted to set the foundation for everyone, knowing that not everyone has a science background, not everyone has a medical background. So, my next episode coming up is on bone because we talked about fat, we talked about muscle. I will be talking about bone. And just to finish off for now, the body composition part, right? And then I go into carbohydrates. I spend actually a whole episode on carbohydrates because I think sometimes people think they know what carbs are, but I just wanted to get us all on the same page and to understand the classes of carbohydrates that are available, right? And why we have carbs in the first place. Because I know we don't need to eat carbs, but why do we have carbs in nature anyway, right? So I do that. Then I talk about how we regulate um, your your sugar levels in your body, and we start with low blood sugar. And I want to talk about how your body actually makes its own sugar, but not necessarily from carbohydrate resources. We use other macronutrients. So sometimes we think you don't eat sugar, you're not going to have, sugar in your bloodstream, or you're not making a lot of sugar. But you can make a lot of sugar if you eat other substrates. And therefore, when you dose your meals, it's not just don't eat X, right? It's not just eat this amount of protein, it's eat X amount of protein per meal. Because metabolically, if you don't follow that rule, then things change, right? So it's per meal dosing. And you have to also work out the intervals as well, right? And then I'll go into high blood sugar and also why that's bad. Because again, it's bad for you, it's damaging, but how exactly is it bad, right? What is it actually doing in your body? I think it's important we know that. And once we understand what insulin is trying to do, then now we can talk about insulin resistance, right? So it's a slow ramp up because I really want to make sure that we are on the right page. Because when I talk about insulin resistance, when I actually get to that topic, I have a feeling that people are going to go, what did she just say? Did she really just say that? And yeah, and that's why I'm going slowly because there's a lot of fuzzy concepts around that. Okay. So we'll talk about insulin. Cholesterol, very interesting also. Very interested in lipoproteins and the immune response. So I've been following that for a long time, following that for actually a couple of years. There is online, if you look on YouTube, I did a talk recently in May, and it's called the Magical Mystery Macrophage Tour, right? Magical Mystery Macrophage Tour. Look for it. It was at IHMC, and it's about this specific class of immune cells called macrophages. And I definitely tried to make it non-technical, but I wanted you to see how important these cells are. Why did I focus on macrophages? Because if you look at atherosclerotic plaques, right? What do we talk about? That the immune cells that are always involved in atherosclerosis are those macrophages, right? A specific class of those macrophages. And that's how I got interested in macrophages. So I did this general overview for the public, lay public. You don't have to have a science background. The Magical Mystery Macrophage Tour, right? And hopefully that will set a little bit of the groundwork on those specific cells. But when we talk about cholesterol, and especially in the context of atherosclerosis, it would be useful to know a little bit about those macrophages. Okay. Um, Other things being equal, right? Can I infer that people with a more inflammatory system are more likely to develop cancers? Okay, cancer is so genius that it's really, really hard. When we talk about metabolic pathways, it really depends on where the cancer is, right? So a primary cancer in the breast is different from a melanoma, is different from a pancreatic cancer, right? So the actual tissue, when you look at metabolic pathways in cancer, going to be very specific to the tissue type. That's number one. Number two is that there are a million metabolic pathways, which is why it's been so hard to kind of get a handle on cancer, right? So your body always has these back routes that it can use. Can't use glucose? That's okay. I can use protein. Can't use protein? I love fats, right? So those cancer cells, they are very slippery and there are a million back roads, okay? A million back roads and very dependent on tissue type, right? But that episode that I'll eventually do, and I've been actually even today thinking about how I will approach that topic because it's a huge topic. It's fairly new, right? We never really talked about the metabolism of cancer cells and also the metabolism of the immune cells, right? So two things going on at the same time. Cancer cells have a specific metabolic profile, and then your immune cells will have a specific metabolic profile. And, when you match those two profiles, then you get cancers that will proliferate. So, just to answer the question about a more inflammatory system, it really depends. Generally, in the tumor microenvironment, I'm talking about solid tumors, in the tumor microenvironment, what you're going to see is that the cancer cells are going to try to suppress the killer T cells, for example, right? And kind of calm them down and make them dormant almost. Quiescent is the word we use. So you kind of quiet them down, hush, hush, and so that they're not able to really attack and kill the cancer cells. So it is in the interest of the cancer cell to make sure, right, that the immune cell is just kind of sitting there. And you'll find, for example, in all of these very highly proliferative cancers, the T cells are just sitting around going la 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 la. And meanwhile, the cancer cells are actively proliferating, right? And just also remember that there is a huge tussle for resources. Okay. Your cancer cell is going to require energy and nutrients to grow, and those T cells will need the energy too. So if we keep the immune cells quiet and metabolically kind of at rest, then we prioritize all the nutrients and resources to the cancer cells. So in the microenvironment, when you look at where the research is going, they're trying to actually make those immune cells more uh, inflammatory, more aggressive, right? So that they recognize the cancer cells and kill them. Okay, so Cecile likes the bone one. Yeah, bone. Don't want to give too much away. I do spend a lot of time on bone and structure of bone. The whole osteoporosis thing. But I just snuck in there, so it's kind of a long episode. Sorry about that. But I snuck in there immune function of bone, right? Immune function of bone. Nobody talks about that. Where are all your immune cells born? Hint, hint. Yeah. And nobody talks about the immune function of bone. I talk about the immune function of everything, so maybe that's why I thought about it. But the immune function of bone, and it also secretes hormones. People maybe are not aware that your bone will secrete hormones, and some of those hormones may even play a role with how metabolism occurs in your body, right? So I think those are the things that we maybe are not prioritizing when we talk about, but we just kind of talk about, yeah, we don't want to break bones and have fractures. And that's really important. I do spend a lot of time on that to make sure we have healthy bones. But if you think very carefully, without your bones, you would have no immune system. Okay. PUFAs. Someone asked me about that. Polyunsaturated fatty acids. What do I think about them? Well, when we talk about polyunsaturated fatty acids, we talk about basically these fatty acids that have um, double bonds in them, which means they are more reactive. Okay, and there are different types, depending on where the bonds are. So we have the omega 3s, the omega 6s, the omega 9s, right? And the number just indicates where those double bonds are. And because you have those double bonds, then you have a more reactive molecule, right? Now, those PUFAs, those polyunsaturated fatty acids, are really important for membrane structure. So we got to have them, right? But there is a balance between the omega 3s and the omega 6s in your body. And if you have too much of the omega 6s, they tend to be more of the inflammatory types of fatty acids. So the ideal is to have a 1-to-1 ratio of 3s to 6s. The average American has, you know, 25 times more the inflammatory omega 6s than the omega 3s, right? So we're actually, based on our diet, because of all the processed seed oils, you're going to see a lot of the omega 6s in your diet if you prioritize that. One other thing that we always tell people, and they don't want to hear this, I know, I wrote somewhere once, a few times, that my full-time job is telling people things they don't want to hear. So I'm going to tell you something you don't want to hear, which is that if you eat out a lot, folks, I hate to tell you this, but if you eat out a lot, every restaurant you go to, every single one is using seed oils because it is cheap. It is the cheapest oil, right? So people will say to me, I don't touch those seed oils. I don't do omega 6s, right? If you're eating out every night, which some of my patients, actually a large proportion of my patients have been doing that. If you eat out every night, sorry, you're getting a nice healthy dose of omega 6s. All right, that's number one. A lot of people who go keto will use nuts. Hello, omega 6s in the nuts, right? Yeah, no, people don't think about that. Plenty of omega 6s in the nuts. And actually, also, the carb count really adds up very quickly. No one wants to believe that either, right? So I just probably told you 2 or 3 things you didn't want to hear, but it's the truth, right? And that's the thing about nutrition and nutrition advice. Sometimes we focus on just one area. So let's say we're going to focus on the macronutrients. So we're worried about the carb count and we are going to proportion our proteins and our fats out, right? But now, hey, excuse me, what happened to the types of fats and where you're getting them from? That's number one. Number two, how about minerals? Right? I mean, like magnesium is involved, for example, in 600 biochemical reactions in your body. Do we get enough magnesium? No. Right? Do we get enough potassium? No, we don't. Right? So where are we getting those nutrients? Right? And how about the vitamins? Because sometimes people think they're getting enough vitamins. Now, what people don't realize is the Krebs cycle, a lot of the cofactors are your B vitamins, for example. So you don't have enough, you can't store your B vitamins. Yeah, right? They're water soluble. So you don't have enough of those. Yeah, that Krebs cycle will not run, right? And really, I think that, uh, I know that people talk about nutrition and the big fight is over maybe the macronutrient content, but I think we definitely have to go beyond that and look at the bigger picture because the macronutrients are very important, but we really have to start also prioritizing other aspects of nutrition. As I said, the vitamins, the minerals, for example, the sources, okay, from which you'll get those nutrients. And then also the combination, right? So if you combine, for example, a meal where you have a lot of calcium. So someone is doing a lot of cheese, for example, maybe yogurt in that meal. That's not a meal that you're going to absorb much iron, right? Or, any of the other um, minerals, okay? Because the calcium will intervene and not allow you to absorb as well. So dosing it, right? So B vitamins. We famously tell our first of all, I don't dose with thiamine hydrochloride because not very well absorbed. That's number one. But the other thing about that is that, there are certain phenols that will bind the thiamine and you will not absorb them. So phenols are seen in your coffee, in your tea, right? So those are natural phenols. And hi, Adam. You just said hi. So I just want to say hi. Natural phenols that will bind the thiamine and then you don't absorb it. Also, if you eat sushi, you took your B vitamins, you had your lovely sushi. Well, the sushi has deaminases that will not allow you to absorb your thiamine, right? So, again, what you're eating your meal with, I mean, the combination, we think a lot about that. We spend hours thinking about that. And so when we make our dietary recommendations, I try not to overwhelm my patients, but we're very specific. We tell them do it this way. Now they don't have to crunch the numbers. They don't have to worry about it, but we worry about it. And I'll just let you know that pretty much every year to every 2 years, we do a whole review of our nutritional recommendations. We just go back and look at the research to update, and my patients all know whatever I prescribe in terms of nutrition, it's not etched in stone. And the reason is what we do that's different, I think, is that we always try to give state of the art practice guidelines, right? So we go back every year and a half, and we'll review the entire literature. And then we revise as needed our dietary recommendations, right? And then based on that, we let our patients know. So, for example, just to give you a small example, is we recently, a year ago, revised our protein recommendations because in recognition of anabolic resistance, which I think I talked about in the last episode, episode 4, right? This anabolic resistance allowed us, hi, Mark. Um, yes, I'm going to talk about that. Okay. So we had to revise our protein recommendations, and it was very hard to get patients to think. I did a whole class on it, and I've been talking about it a lot, but we review our recommendations all the time. Um, Differences and similarities of an anti-inflammatory diet and keto diet. Okay, so there are many nutritional benefits of going on a ketotic diet. You don't even have to be in full ketosis. Low carb will often do the job for a lot of people who are maybe not on the spectrum where they're seriously ill and so forth. Okay. Ketones themselves have an anti-inflammatory effect. So a lot of times I will use a ketogenic diet, or I might, depending on the patient population, because if you have someone with dementia, it's very hard to get them to follow any diet. So the best you can do is maybe use exogenous, kind of ketones, exogenous tools. So in some of those people, some of my inflammatory bowel patients, that I might dose with exogenous ketones as well, right? Because if the ketone bodies themselves uh, tend to have an anti-inflammatory effect, and these ketone bodies, they are also signaling molecules. So it's not just a nutrient, So we think of it as sort of a macronutrient. You could think of it that way. That comes out of fats, but they are important signaling molecules, right? And in that way, we can, you know, prioritize the cell towards an inflammatory or an anti-inflammatory pathway, depending on signaling in the body, in the cells, right? So those ketone bodies can be very useful in signaling towards anti-inflammatory pathways. But again, if you are consuming, for example, a lot of those very inflammatory seed oils, so the omega 3s, right? Sorry, omega 6s. Yeah, not the 3s, the 6s. Those would cause inflammation. You can be in ketosis, right? But you would still have a huge inflammatory load with the PUFAs, okay? So you can have that going on at the same time. And you really want to make sure you balance, and that's why we're very careful. We are not, so for example, you tell people to eat a lot of fat, okay? and you're hoping that you will get your patients cut the carbs, eat the fats, eat some protein, and will get you into ketosis. Let's say they get nicely into ketosis, but they're eating trans fat, they're eating tubs of margarine. Okay, that's highly inflammatory, right? So we're kind of working against ourselves. A lot of times I see this also when you buy fat soluble vitamins. So, this is like classic for us. What we discovered is, say you want to dose your patient with vitamin D. It's a fat soluble vitamin, right? So when you go, and we did this, Driss did this. Driss went to the store and he scanned the. This is what we do, all right? So we're a little weird, and people get uncomfortable because we go into the store and we want to know. And I can tell you what is it? What was that ice cream store near us, Driss? I don't remember, but I went and gave them a hard time. But anyway, we go to the store, and he looked, and he came back with this, and he was like, all the vitamin D is the supplemental vitamin D is actually in these capsules, and because it has to be fat soluble, they're in capsules of safflower oils, soybean oil. So you're essentially giving your omega-3 in your omega-6 oil. All right, the whole idea was we have too much omega-6. We want to give more omega-3 to right the balance, but we give it together with an omega-6. So did you do anything? No, you spent a lot of money, right? And you didn't do anything. Flush down the tube, right? So that's why it's frustrating, because you want to look at the content, right? And then Anna's my head coach, and she went further, and she's like, a lot of that oil is rancid, Dr. Loh. And so we're as a team very passionate about what we do. So we make sure we try to suss things out a little bit, but making sure that we hit all the different components. It's not just telling people to eat X, Y, and Z. It's making sure you have the best quality, right? And in an absorbable form, in a form that is bioactive, that isn't going to be, sort of non-absorbable because you ate it with something else, right? So that combination, and thinking through all the time, you know, what we have to do. So I think, when you're prescribing a diet, you have to keep all those things in mind. Okay, these are great questions. Any other, um, I'm trying to read the list. Uh, so, if there's a vote for inflammation, I'd love to do a whole episode on inflammation. Ideas on D3 levels where things can get toxic. Okay. 60 to 100, where you are for the vitamin D, is fine. I wouldn't call it toxic. In if you lived in the tropics where I grew up, you know, half hour in the sun, and it's like a dose of 20,000 international units of vitamin D, right? The levels, okay. Oh, I just want to point out that vitamin D, the receptor is intracellular. So, a lot of times we think of cell receptors on the outside of the cell. With vitamin D, it's inside. So that's why it's been hard to really understand what's going on with vitamin D. But I do think that the levels of 40 to 60 would be where we need to hit it. And if people are a little higher than that, and I'm not alarmed, you obviously don't want to get too high. But I will say it's kind of really hard to do that. And sometimes if I see someone who's creeping, as you mentioned, you were a little bit over 100, so you know what? Just don't take it for a few days, right? Just don't take it for a few days. So if I see a patient and they're going a little high, I'll just say, hey, just take it every other day. It's fat soluble, right? And so it's going to be stored in fat. The volume of distribution is mostly in the fat. And we'll say this because I treat a lot of patients with obesity. So I do watch them very carefully, because it is stored in fat. And when you lose the fat, then you release the stored vitamin D. So I am a little bit careful about that. Okay. So I just watch, but I've generally really not, I've really not had it be a big problem. Okay, Driss is asking about nutritional ketosis versus internet ketosis. Internet ketosis, I don't know what to make of it, right? Because there's a lot going on. I think the plus is that people are interested. The plus is that people are understanding that, hey, there's a whole big world here in nutrition that the medical world has not even explored, right? So, there's a lot that we can do for our health, and we really want to know more. And people are taking charge and taking control of their own health by addressing their lifestyle, and nutrition is a big one, right? Internet ketosis. Okay, I often get a lot of times people send me, or my patients bring me, these cookbooks called ketogenic diet. First page, quinoa out, no ketosis possible, right? So it's really hard to get into. Most times they'll come to me and they go, well, it worked for a little while and it stopped working, because they were probably doing low carb, which is a good thing. It's not bad at all. And a lot of times people will maybe even for the first few weeks get into ketosis, right? But then eventually things creep back in. And then by the time, it's several weeks out, they're more likely to be just doing low carb. Okay. And in terms of where it's a medical prescription, if someone has seizures, right? If they have some profound brain injury, for example, and you need to keep them in ketosis to allow the brain to heal and to give nutrition to the brain, right? And increase your brain energetics, then it would be dangerous actually. Like if someone had a diagnosis of seizures and you prescribed medically a ketogenic diet, then if they went to the hospital and in the IV they give a nice flush of D5, right? Say you didn't feel well, you had some GI symptoms, you went to the emergency room and they put you on D5, which is essentially glucose, right? That would be very dangerous for that patient, because we're using the ketogenic diet to make sure that we are, going after a medical effect, yeah, a medical um, uh, goal. Okay, so I just I'm happy that most people are cutting out, if they're interested in their health, they are starting to understand that we have to cut out, first of all the processed carbs out. Okay. And that is already a huge step. And if we can get rid of the processed carbs, then the next step is, maybe we don't need that many carbs in general, right? And if we can come down to a more reasonable level, because the average American is hitting about 300 to 400 grams. It's about 11 pounds of sugar per, I think it's per, don't get me wrong, but I heard somewhere it was per month, uh, which is kind of, I'm thinking about this and I'm like, oh my God, right? But that's a lot of sugar. Even if it's per year, it seems like a lot, but I think it's actually per month. Okay. So if we can get people to decrease that load, that would be um, that would be good. To go back to the cancer issue, because dear, you want to know about that, right? That the more inflammatory, the less likely to develop cancer. Again, this is a tough one, because oftentimes an inflammatory environment is what sets you up for cancer. Hypoxia is huge, huge, huge in the cancer tumor microenvironment, huge. Hypoxia will set off alarms for inflammation, right? And that will already program genes differently, right? And will have different effects. And the body's trying to adapt. In short term, sort of situation, it'll probably be fine. But if we have a longer chronic situation of inflammation, that's when we set up the tumor environment. So that's why cancer is so tough, because, and that's the thing, when I hear people have a very definitive absolutist view about cancer, I'm just a little bit nervous about that. Okay, because again, it really depends on when you are catching it. At some point, the rise in inflammation will predispose you to more of the cancerous cells and more mutations, because certain genes will be turned on, Hypoxia, as I said, famously does that. Acidic environments in the tissue also will do that. They will actually be not good for the inflammatory cells, but they're great for the growth of tumors, right? So we can set up these microenvironments. And the other tough thing about cancer, I want to say, is that within an area of cancer, you have different microenvironments within one area of cancer. So let's just pick a tissue. Let's pick liver. So if you have liver and you say, okay, so it's liver cancer, and it's this kind of pathway and these reactions with the immune cells, and that's not true because within that tumor, we have different microenvironments. Some areas will have more oxygen, some will have less, some will have more interaction and more penetration by some of the immune cells and some less, right? So that's what's really, really tough. And that's, again, and this is my thing about science, right? I love that we're bringing this to the general public and that there's a larger, sort of consideration of what is going on in research. But then we only see one piece, and that's the piece that gets broadcast and popularized and sometimes sensationalized, right? And if it were that simple, you'd be dead a long time ago. You'd be dead a long, 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 long time ago. The reason I say that is your body is highly sophisticated and it has all these back roads and little mechanisms to switch pathways, right? Because you've had to survive, right? We've had to survive as a species, different changes in the environment, different conditions in weather, right? In food resources, for example, different stresses, temperature and so forth. So your body needs that metabolic flexibility. And if it were just one thing, we would have been wiped out. I don't think we would have made it to the two-legged stage, right? Just saying. We probably, some of us are still not at the two-legged stage. I know, we all know some of those, but we probably would not have made it to the two-legged stage if we were just depending on one or two pathways. Because if you just wipe out that pathway, you would wipe all of us out as a species, right? So we have a million backup pathways. Never ceases to amaze me. And when we get very simplistic and say, it's only this, it's because of that, right? And we can take care of it if we just did X. Well, you can definitely put yourself in a better place, but I wouldn't be so sure that that's going to fix everything. And that's the struggle in cancer research. Okay, because believe it or not, the researchers got just as excited as I was when we, looked at the Warburg effect. They were just as excited, and that the good thing about that was that it brought about this interest in metabolism in cancer. And people started putting money in metabolism in cancer. But very shortly after that, we found, ooh, oh, we can use we can use fats. Are you kidding me? Right? Um, to set up a cancer environment, yeah, you can, right? So these are all signaling molecules. So we think of nutrients as, units of energy, caloric value. They give you X number of calories if you eat X, Y, and Z. But nutrients are also these macromolecules, right? Macronutrients, they are also, in the end, they become signaling molecules, which means that these signals, right, are communicating with other cells and your tissue in order to set up sort of a balanced environment, right? So we have all kinds of sensors going on, and nutrient sensors are very important. Energy sensors are very important. That's why I did that episode 1. I know it was a little chancy, risky to do that in a first podcast because, like, oh my God, people are just going to be like, what is she going to talk about? The electron, what? But if we're going to eventually get to an episode on cancer metabolism, we need to start thinking about metabolism that way, how we harvest energy and how your body has these energy sensors. Because, you want to do anything, you're going to need energy. If you're a cancer cell, you're going to need energy. If you're an immune cell, you're going to need energy. How are you going to get it? Because there are all these other cells. It's a tough world, right? And they're eyeing the same piece of steak. and every cell's going, that's mine, right? And it's really going to be a little bit of a tussle to see who gets those resources. Okay. So I think we need to start thinking about it that way rather than just, oh, you eat this, you get X number of calories, and then that happens. And maybe we add in some hormones there, but don't forget, we are signaling all the time and we're signaling resources to different parts of the body. You know what? Brain needs some energy right now, or we're all gone, right? So prioritize the brain. Okay. Then that means everybody else comes second, third, fourth, fifth. Okay. We're going to just prioritize the brain, right? But there might be other areas. For example, you get a cut somewhere, we got to prioritize that area. And then that area becomes more metabolically active. So we're not used to thinking of, you know, different locations that might require different metabolic activity at any point in time. Okay. All right. Any other questions? These are great questions. And it's really nice to see that people are starting to engage with, science in that way. And, hopefully also more medical professionals. Maya had a question about my book. Would I consider making an audiobook version? Yeah, sure. I mean, once I get the book out, right? A lot of I'm a novelist, and people ask me, I want to write a book. Do you have any advice? And I give this advice to myself, and it's not easy to follow, right? And it really is, if you want to write a book, if you want to write fiction, nonfiction, any book, the advice is apply but to chair. Apply but to chair. Okay. And that's advice I'm giving myself now, Maya. So I have to apply my butt to the chair and crank it out and make sure that we get that book out. The problem is, and Andres knows this, I was working on a book on inflammation, and then I saw a patient of mine, and she said, how come your book's not done? And I said, oh, because there are all these things about inflammation that I'm trying to figure out how to make it understandable for the general public. And she says, inflammation? I thought you were going to talk about like what you teach us about the body composition, why we have to worry about visceral fat. And I looked at her and I said, oh, really? She said, that's the book I want to read. I want to show my family members because they think I'm crazy. And I was like, ooh, okay, got to work on that one too. So it's more than one book, unfortunately. So it's more, it's actually two or maybe more books involved, right? Are we going to see an episode on salts? So I did a talk in January of this year, and I talked about salt. It was at Low Carb in Boca Raton, and I think I spent more than an hour. I think it was given an hour, but the topic was so huge, it kind of went into an hour and a half. And I did specifically talk about salt. So I will see if I can find the link and put it up there. But the interesting thing about salt is that, there's all these questions about do we have to follow those salt recommendations, or can we liberate it a bit more? I think it's ethnicity dependent, and also depends on what is going on in your body, right? If there are certain inflammatory systems going on in your body. One of the big ones, which I probably will do an episode on, is called RAS, RAAS. It sounds like, no, not like reggae, yeah, man, RAS, but not as fun. RAS. Okay, so that's a highly inflammatory system. If you already revved up your RAS, I think salt in the presence of an overactivated RAS system is not a good thing. If you're not ramped up in an inflammatory mode, you don't have chronic inflammation going on, your body, I think, actually does a great job of handling salt. And you might be surprised, because I quoted in that study, if you find, I'll try and look for it also and put it in the link somewhere in my website. But your body has its own way of handling the salt. It involves your skin also. your body actually, we think of the salt going into our bloodstream, but it's actually sequestered in the skin. Skin, skin, hello, skin, right? It's in the skin. And then it has its own sort of rhythm. We talk about the circadian rhythm, like day night rhythm, right? And it has its own monthly cycle. Yeah, it's like PMS. No, not really. But it has its own monthly cycle, salt, right? The cycling of salt. And they know that from NASA studies. So I did talk about the NASA study, the NASA 500 study in that talk, which is kind of fascinating. So, yeah, that was a huge topic. And since you mentioned potassium, Cecile, yes. And it looks like actually, rather than the problem of it being too much sodium, because there, okay, salt is two components, right? Sodium, chloride. And folks, we have known since the, I don't know, 1970s that chlorine, the chloride part alone raises your blood pressure. So if you give, and I say this in the talk, if you give people sodium bicarb, blood pressure doesn't go up. Okay. You give them, I don't know, sodium phosphate, blood pressure doesn't go up. If you just give chloride alone, up goes the blood pressure. So it's always been sodium, sodium, sodium. Chloride was just a little halo. And actually, chloride is actually pretty bad. Okay, in terms of raising your blood pressure. And actually, the more potassium you consume, then, and that's assuming you have a normal kidney. So don't go saying Dr. Loh told me to go. No. Okay, so check with your healthcare provider. I don't know how much they can help you, but I'm going to say that just to CYA, okay? But anyway, yeah, that's reality. That's my reality, right? So potassium, you really have to make sure that you get enough potassium. So I do try to prioritize potassium intake with my patients as well. Everybody hyper focuses on the sodium part, should worry about the chloride part. And also they forget that actually the potassium can offset a lot of the problems that we see with that we think we see with high sodium. Okay, so there's that. And any advice for future healthcare professionals? Ooh, that's a tough one. And I know, besides for Jasmine, I think Maya is a medical student. She's at BU. I met her at BU very recently. That's my alma mater. So my, you know, my advice is this, right? They always said that 50% of what you learn, you'll realize later in your career that 50% of what you learn in medical school was wrong. The problem is you don't know which 50%, right? And that I find is basically true. But my big problem is that the general medical curriculum is not on par with basic science. So basic science research, it has been amazing last 2 decades. Even in the 90s, I mean, we just had amazing stuff going on. That's basic science, that achievements that we've achieved and reached. We're not translating that into clinical practice, right? So it's just sort of abstract. And if we translate it into clinical practice, it is only in the context of medication. Right? So, how can I spin this off into a drug? That is the only translation you will get of basic science, right? So, the problem in the medical curriculum, I think, is that we need to start to understand the basic science even more, keep up with current basic science, and also realize that your body has, all in all these ages, the human body has ways of dealing with these with the changes in your environment, for example, right? So if we don't mess with it too much, we're probably going to be okay. So how do we figure out what we've messed with? Because you live in a culture, you live in society, and everything seems normal. But kind of sorting out what is harming you, what is causing a lot more maybe inflammation in the wrong context and anti-inflammation in the wrong context, right? That's the kind of translation we need. And to look at nutritional supplementation in a really kind of more sophisticated way, I will say, right? I want to say one thing, for example, I give you here's another nutrition example, which is why, I mean, we tear our hair out all the time, right? No, vegan diets are the most healthy diets in the world. No, if you look, just go look. Just go. Every country that prioritizes a vegan diet has profound mineral deficiencies. Profound mineral deficiencies. Zinc and iron and magnesium, everything, right? Why? Because plant sources are rich in phytic acid, which would be the storage form of phosphorus in plants. They're negatively charged. They will bind all positively charged minerals like potassium, like calcium, like magnesium, like zinc, and you will not absorb it. Okay, so profound, for example, mineral deficiencies in those diets. But we don't talk about that because I don't know what we're focused on, really. So anyway, that's my take. Um, binds everything. I think, yeah, you're talking about the phytic acid. Yeah. So, and then there's people who tell me, oh, but I soak my beans. Okay. My quinoa. All right. And I read this in a textbook, so it's not just me. So with quinoa, for example, to remove the phytic acid, you would have to, I think, soak for 24 hours, changing the water every 2 to 3 hours. Then you have to lacto ferment it for God knows how many hours. Then you have to cook it at a certain, I mean, yeah, if you have a butler to do this for you, great. You'll probably achieve getting rid of all the phytic acid. But in the normal course of life, and I don't know anyone who's doing that to get rid of the phytic acid, right? So the little few hours that people are soaking it, that's not enough. Not enough. Okay. Yeah, you got me going there. Picked all the right buttons to press, all of you, right? Maybe you know me too well already. Other thoughts or questions? So I'm hearing that people want to hear about exercise and how to do resistance training. Uh, I don't know if I heard that people want to hear about inflammation, but I'm going to say I heard people because I want to do an episode. So I heard you say you want to hear about inflammation and cancer metabolism. I heard that loud and clear, right? I think salt, definitely minerals will do that. And the whole insulin. I'm actually working up towards the insulin resistance. So you gotta stay tuned and just bear in mind, I'm doing a long ramp up, right? And the reason I said as you know is because there's too many fuzzy concepts. I want to make sure we're definitely on the same page because when you get to insulin resistance, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to go, "Did she just say what I think she said?" Yeah, and it's going to be yeah, yeah. Okay, so that's why I want to do it slowly so we understand and we get on the same page. And by the time we get to insulin resistance, hopefully it will give you a clear idea. And I will say this, I don't know everything because no one knows everything about insulin resistance. It's a very complex subject, and insulin regulates so many other processes in your body and is regulated by other hormones too. So it's not just binary where we're thinking only insulin and glucagon, which is how most of the discussions are couched, right? So that's a very binary view, and that's not what happens. And then the other thing is we only, folks, only talk about the glucose disposal part of insulin. In other words, how it handles glucose. But glucose does a million other things. I mean, sorry, insulin does a million other things. And if you didn't have insulin, remember I talked about anabolic resistance building muscle. Yeah, you're not building much muscle if you don't have insulin. Right? You need that insulin. And like for my patients who have sarcopenia, I have to give them a little bit of an insulin boost. Yeah, me give them and I'm the low carb ketogenic queen, right? So I'm giving them an insulin boost, yeah, because I know what I'm using it for. I need that muscle to grow. I won't have that happen if I don't get a little bit of help from insulin, right? So it's very simplistic to say, oh, XYZ, right? Do this, do that, and it's very polarized. Just don't eat this, don't, I know it's much more nuanced than that. If you know what you're doing, you can get a lot of mileage out of it for your patients. but you have to be very nuanced about it, right? So that's why I'm taking my time with insulin. And insulin and cancer have, sort of, there's a huge topic there in itself. Insulin in the brain, insulin in the periphery, in the rest of your body. Whoo, different worlds, different worlds. Does it have an impact in your brain? Absolutely, but you can't generalize what you see in the body for the brain. So peripheral insulin and CNS insulin, I've been looking at it for years. I can tell you, very different. And insulin in the brain is very important, so much so that we actually think that your brain makes some of its own insulin, right? So yeah, it's a pretty complex subject, and I don't want it to be simplistic, which is why we're doing this long ramp up. So I hope you'll be patient, especially when we get to those episodes where I'm talking about carbs and how you make glucose on your own in your body and so forth. Okay. Um, Farmers selling, what is it? Insulin as a growth factor. Yeah, so precocious puberty could be an insulin effect. Also, it's kind of well documented now. Even the Endocrine Society has been very worried about it. The endocrine disruptors. So these are things that are found in, for example, the bisphenol A. Remember the plastics? Yeah, they're everywhere. They're everywhere. Even the bisphenol B. Yeah, everybody goes, "Oh, it doesn't have bisphenol." Yeah, yeah. So all of these are endocrine disruptors, and so they kind of have an estrogenic effect on your body. And it seems, especially, I think the endocrinologists believe that the precocious puberty, and it could be linked with nutrient status, yes, with insulin as well, but with endocrine disruptors that are prevalent in our food water supply everywhere. Everybody can't escape it. um, that probably has a very huge role in the precocious puberty. And certainly, yeah, with excessive processed food consumption in children, we can have insulin overload. We see that huge rise in obesity in the pediatric population, right? I think the thing that is frustrating for me is often you hear parents Parents say this. I always hear this. Yeah, but my kids are young and they're skinny. So they can have the goldfish, the candy, the whatever, right? And that's just looking at the weight aspect. Okay. I'm like, because you can't see your blood vessels, you can't see how the brain is developing, right? So I hear this a lot. Oh, my son, he's an athlete, so he's skinny and he needs his. I'm like, your son's an athlete, shouldn't be eating pizza and junk because athletes don't do that, right? But they'll tell you that. Parents will always tell you that. And, I bought the peanut butter or whatever. It's not for me, it's for my son. And then they confess, yeah, I ate the whole jar. My son hates peanut butter. Yeah, we hear that a lot. We always get it out of them. I don't know how. Anna, as I said, is my head coach. She's very good at that. She's very good at getting things out of my patients. So, no, so it wasn't really for your son. It was for you. Okay, good to know. We can work from there, right? But yeah, so a lot of times they'll be like, the kids, they're fine. Um, Even if they're not accumulating visceral fat, I will say this: we assume that development has mostly been completed, right? But that brain in a child is going for the next 20 years. And if it's a male child, it's going to be 25 years. That brain is still being, in the process of development and making connections and being pruned. There are neural networks that are pruned, right? And the brain is made up of fat, essentially. So if you're consuming a lot of these inflammatory fats like the omega 6s, that's what you're putting in your brain, your child's brain. The peanut butter, yeah, so replace with nut butter. All nuts, those nuts have omega 6s. That's why all the keto people, they're like, nuts, nuts, nuts. I'm like, Okay, I'm all for keto, but the nuts, no. Because again, we're only looking at one, like, you know, a little bit of a myopic view. Yeah. So, so then what do you give them? Since you can't give them peanut butter and no nut butter, I would just say butter. Take away the nut butter. Butter is a lot healthier than the nut butter of any kind, right? So you can give them butter. It's actually quite yummy. I mean, if they get used to it, it gets very yummy. Touch of salt, sweet butter with a touch of salt. Just saying. Okay, I am not a cook, so don't take any kind of like sensory advice from me. But I find that yummy. Okay, any any other what can and then the whole other thing I always get asked like, well, so if you can't eat that, if my kids can't eat that, what do they have for breakfast? Okay, breakfast is just another meal. Okay, it's just another meal. I mean, it's very cultural. So, but most of the world, they don't need pancakes for breakfast. They don't need waffles for breakfast. They don't need, right? So, just another meal. And you prioritize the protein, some healthy fats, right? So, yeah, you give them eggs, for example, right? One of my good friends from medical school, she's a OBGYN, and we had that conversation. And then she went and talked to her son, and he was pretty happy eating grilled chicken in the morning. He was like, oh, okay. Right. So he ended up, that's what he eats for breakfast. He has some grilled chicken, or whatever meats from the night before, and he has that for breakfast. And he's pretty happy with that. Okay. All right. Any other questions? I just want to say I am so grateful, to all of you for showing up on this Q&A. Very, very grateful because I just want you to know I'm standing here. This is a hallway. Okay. So I know I'm giving you all my secrets. I'm standing in a hallway. And when I'm making those podcasts, it's on a weekend or after hours, and I'm talking to myself for hours. I'm talking to a screen, and I'm like, sometimes I want to go, hello, 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 hello. Anybody there? Anybody? Because so it helps to know there's someone at the other end because I know I often talk to myself, but not that often and not for so long, right? So I am going on and on and on a screen, and it's really nice to see that you are here and that this is helpful to you. Please do subscribe, like, share with your friends and family, and most of all, please leave me some comments because it feels a little lonely on my own here, right? So just having this interaction with you is very, very helpful. And I hope to be doing more of these sessions on a regular basis. Again, tell me what would be helpful every 2 weeks. Let me know because I'm a newbie at this. I'm learning, and I'm just hoping that whatever I bring is going to be of help to you. Okay. All right. I know I do this with my patients when we're on Zoom together. We'll just do a group hug. Okay. One, two. I know people think you're strange. It's okay. 1, 2, 3. Group hug. There we go. And bye. We'll see you another time. Take care. Okay, Carl. How do we do the rest?